From Music for All and presented by Yamaha, it's Teaching Social Emotional Learning Through Music, a practical web series for all music educators, embedding SEL into music education. On this episode, we welcome renowned educator Alice Hammel. Please welcome the host of Teaching Social Emotional Learning Through Music, Scott Edgar.
Welcome to our next episode of Teaching Social and Emotional Learning Through Music. Today we are honored to be joined by Alice Hammel to give us some insight into how we can meld the world of music education, social and emotional learning, and teaching students with disabilities. Alice, welcome to the program. We're thrilled you're here.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for asking me to be here.
Oh, our honor. I would like to start by delving into a little bit about your past, about what was your motivation to start looking at music education and truly embracing this idea of music for all?
Well, I think it started before I was born. My parents were physicians, specifically pediatricians, and they decided to do a very unusual thing at that time, and to not use childcare and not have babysitters, and instead I went everywhere with them. So I had a crib in my parents' office in the hospital, and I had one in their private practice place. I was always with them. My mother said that my high chair was the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. They didn't waste money on silly things like high chairs. They just set me up on medical books and DSMs. So I would follow them around the hospital. I think I was going on rounds when I was still a preschooler, had my stethoscope, and would go to conferences with them. And once I was in middle elementary school, I got to choose my own sessions and was just going to conferences and listening to lectures and hanging out in the exhibit hall. Sometimes they would teach outside, and I would just sit and sit with the class under the trees and listen to them teach their classes when they taught in medical school. When we moved and my parents went into just private practice, I worked in their office. I started with emptying the trash cans and pulling out the paper for the next patient, and worked my way up to doing the Medicaid billing by the time I was in high school. So along with that, I got to see a lot of children who did not go to our school. We only had one middle school, so I didn't know where they were if they weren't in my school. They didn't go to school with me, and I didn't see them anywhere except when they came to my parents' office. So I started asking a lot of questions about school and who goes to what school and why, and about specific disabilities. And I did a lot of reading and learned about them. And I actually started teaching a little girl who was deaf how to play the flute when I was in 7th grade. So it just kind of was me. And then at the same time, I was singing to strangers in grocery stores when I was little. I was a very strange child. So I did that. And then I did all the musics possible in our really small rural part of Central Florida. I did band and choir and drama and all the everythings that had to do with music. So I knew in 7th grade, when we were playing Treasury of Scales number 19, that I wanted to be a band director. I wanted to live in band forever. So I made that commitment right during line 19 one day. And that was what I said from then on, from 7th grade on. I'm going to be a middle school band director. And at the same time, I was fascinated with everything that's different. Things are the same, or my husband and I were talking last night about a couple of tennis players. And one is that classically handsome, he said, the Ken look. And this other guy had the kind of wild hair and, was kind of gangly tall. And I said, oh, he's handsome. So in all ways, I'm attracted to things that are different. So in school, everybody's learning, this is how you get this sound. This is how you do this, these. And I was off in the corner going, oh, that's interesting. Oh, and all the things that were kind of on the fringes were the things that excited me and really got me interested. So that included people who are in any way different. So because of a disability, because of language, because of culture, because of race, because of anything that makes them different from what I was used to, fascinated me.
Alice, I love that you started with your parents, and I know you and I have talked about this. So Deep Dark Secrets, Alice and I are friends, and Alice and I have talked about where we've come from, and both of my parents were social workers, so mental health was on the table from very early on, and we were able to normalize that and talk about that. Excuse me, I wonder if you could delve a little bit deeper into this idea of when you started going into a formal music education and digging into Treasury of Scales with this attraction to things that might be a little bit different. How did you feel being around this setting where we're asked to really dial in and all be the same? 1, 2, ready, go, boom. How did that make you feel?
Do you mean when I went to college?
Was that the first time? I was thinking when you were in 5th grade learning flute.
Oh, okay. It was interesting. I always felt myself turning around to look at the bassoon or the timpani or something that was different. And at home, I was always listening to music on the radio, and I was fascinated by all the pieces that were in compound time. I was really tired of duple. I mean, it was just a lot of 4/4, 2/4. So even in meters and modes, I remember being fascinated with minor when I was in middle school. And so it was an hour and a half to the nearest music store, and I made my mom drive me there so I could get a book of all the minor scales and how you do them and what you do, because I wanted to sure I was playing them correctly. So then I started playing the minor scales, starting on the notes that were not the tonics. I didn't even know what that was, but like, oh, I like these too. So any kind of everything that was different was what I was really interested in. Then in college, I really did fight back against the man on some things as far as repertoire choices. Of course, when it wasn't popular to fight back on repertoire choices, and majors and concentrations. And I said, well, why can't I study this? No, I don't want to do music therapy. I love music therapists and music therapy, but I want this that I didn't even have the language for yet. I just knew that I wanted something different. You know, as soon as I learned that there were things other than being a middle school band director, I said, well, let me think about those. Well, maybe those would be, So I was very lucky to finally get to Florida State, where Dr. Madsen gave me the language and a framework for that crack in the sidewalk between music ed and special ed, because it's not music ed and music therapy, it's music ed and special ed. So I was able to find that.
Really similar to the journey that we're having right now with musical, social, and emotional learning. People are saying, well, isn't that music therapy? And the answer is no, it's not. The population, the goals, the objectives, the procedures, the interventions are all very, very different. I think there are some lessons that we can learn. I think there are some dialogues that we can have and learn from each other. So could you talk a little bit about how that world, because I thought the same thing when people said, Scott, music therapy, couch it in that. No. Can you talk a little bit about how that whole music therapy and musical special education worlds kind of collide?
Mm-hmm. Well, I did take a few music therapy classes because I was a good girl and mostly listened to people and did what they told me to. And I did an internship one summer in an institution for people who struggled with emotions and behaviors. And I followed a music therapist around for the whole summer. And at the end, I was like, I have a profound respect for what you do. And if I ever need you, I'm so happy to know that you're here. But what I want to do for my career is different, because I want to teach musical goals and understandings and skills to people who may have difficulty learning them. So that's kind of the main difference between music education and music therapy.
Thank you. So clear. And the message that I think we all need to hear right now. And we do need to understand what is our job and what is our counselor's job? What are our social workers' job? We need to know what is our lane. And for a lot of this, very rarely do we say stay in your lane. But for a lot of the discussion that we're having right now, it's important for us to know what we can do, but almost more importantly, what we cannot do.
Yes, right.
Yeah. So we know that SEL is a huge buzzword, and I know that you and I have had the honor to spend a little bit of time collaborating and understanding what this looks like. For you, what does social and emotional learning mean in your world?
Well, most of what I know about social and emotional learning, I've learned from you. I believe I had an understanding and I was applying many of the principles. But what you gave me was vocabulary. You gave me vocabulary, you gave me syntax, you gave me a way to really put this in its own realm. And as you said, and not conflate it with music therapy and not conflate it with kind of behavioral or emotional any type of plan or system or, yeah. So, well, to me, social emotional learning is about first understanding yourself, understanding your feelings, why you're feeling the way you do, kind of being able to put words to the way you're feeling, and then also to be able to understand somebody else's feelings, how they feel, and maybe put words to how they feel and what they're going through, and then to be able to kind of see how the two of you are interacting. Well, I'm saying this and feeling because I'm feeling this, and you're because you're feeling this. Let's think about ways that we can interact differently and while honoring the way both of us still are feeling.
Spot on. I mean, as you're talking, I'm just hearing the worlds that we're living in SEL. So understanding ourselves, empathizing with another person and getting along, and then making decisions about how we are going to move forward. Can you talk a bit about what this looks like for some of the adaptations that maybe you have to make in your world? So we know that some disabilities bring with it some challenges that might fly in the face of some of what we just said in terms of emotional recognition, in terms of developing empathy and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Sure. When Ryan Herrig and I decided to write our first book together, Teaching Music to Students with Special Needs, a Label-Free Approach, we really wanted to move away from all of the labels that people give to things now. There are hundreds of labels. And if you'd like them, you can open the DSM, which now is very big for IHR. And labels are great, but they don't tell you anything about the specific student and how they are and how they function within themselves and within their environment. So we decided instead to go with what we call domains. So we identified 6 domains, and we think that you can know an awful lot about a person if you kind of think about them in these ways. So we think about a person's cognition. We think about their communication, the way they communicate with the world. Their sensory systems, we have 7 senses. That's new news. The 7 senses that we have are...
And they are, can you give us the rundown of those senses?
Yes. Okay. So we see, we hear, we smell, we taste, we touch. Those are all the ones that we all learned in first grade. Then there's 2 more that were too big words to put on the bubble sheet, so we didn't learn them in first grade. That's my reason. Proprioception, so how we and our skin and our system interacts with others, and how close or how far away that should be, and when it starts to bother us. And then vestibular system, so our body in space, and when we're upside down and right side up, and why a 3rd grader can be sitting in a circle and then fall over because vestibular. So those are our 7 senses. And then our behavioral domain and our emotional domain. So those things we can see, and we can kind of look at it and get an idea of who a kid is. Much easier, I think, than focusing on a specific chromosomal difference they may have. So when I'm thinking about SEL, and I think I do the same thing, I go through those 6 domains and I say, okay, this student struggles in the sensory domain and in the cognition domain. So when I'm thinking about SEL strategies, I'm going to need to do activities and repeat ideas for that student many more times than I might for a student in the class who has neurotypical cognition, or a student who may have really super fast cognition. And then I think, okay, in the sensory domain, this student is easily overwhelmed by aural stimuli. So I'm going to have to be sure that when I'm using musical cues, when I'm playing music, when we've got instruments and we're thinking about that and we're running that through our SEL and we're playing our instruments while we're doing a book, that things don't become too much for that student. So because I would never want an SEL experience to turn into something that's negative for a child.
Absolutely. And step 1 for many of our students is just emotional vocabulary building. And that is central to whether we're talking, and I thank you for bringing up the word neurotypical, because I really do want to talk to you about neurodiversity. That's a word that is absolutely at the tip of many people's tongues, but I don't think it's quite infiltrated music ed yet. So can you talk to us a little bit about what neurodiversity is?
Well, when you're learning something, you start with what you know, and then you go to what you don't know. So we understand neurotypical. That's, you know, when you're thinking, you know, we're playing in the key of B flat, we're playing in the key of E flat. That's just, to band people, that's neurotypical. That's our day-to-day, what happens, we're comfortable functioning there, and everybody's fine. So when we're thinking about something that's diverse, we might think of a key signature like G sharp minor. I'm looking at you, clarinets. So G sharp minor, right? We're thinking about something that's different, and sometimes that kind of thinking about that difference is can be even a little like your face, like you're thinking jarring. Oh my goodness, G sharp minor. So someone whose brain is neurodiverse would be somewhere maybe around that G sharp minor area. So their brain's a little different. It's got a different amount of flats and sharps, maybe. They think differently, and that difference in thinking can be in cognitive speed. It could be in the way they interact with the world. It could be their sensory systems, how much, how often, you know, they can take in information and what kind of information they can take in. It's super fascinating. Neurodiversity, when you think about it, you think about the way they might learn. Well, it also affects their emotions. It affects their behaviors. It affects everything about a child, because your brain kind of tells you what's real, what's not real. You know, what's happening, what things are, and helps you make sense of things. So if your brain is just hardwired differently, because some people are just, it's the hardwiring that goes into the brain. It's not the soft wiring. We can kind of malleate some things, and social emotional learning really helps with that. But the way a kid is hardwired is the way they're hardwired, or the way an adult is hardwired is the way they're hardwired. So somebody who's neurodiverse, their brain is different. It's hardwired differently. The way they think, the way they feel, the way they interact with the world, and the way they learn is all going to be different. So the super fun thing for us is that we get to be scientists and researchers and figure out, okay, what's the best way to help this kid? And when you're in an ensemble or classroom situation, what's the best way to get this all to work together?
And sometimes that is so hard for us as teachers. You know, I mean, when we see diversity, and, you know, we can't see inside the brain, so we can't see that level of diversity. So we see behaviors, we see responses, we see reactions that aren't what we expect.
Yeah.
And that makes it challenging. So you brought up your book that you wrote with Ryan, the first one, The Label First Approach. And I'd like just to ask you a question around that, because taking from that, understanding that we use person-first language, and we understand that a person is more than a disability. But it seems to me that more and more communities are taking words back, are starting to own the words within their community. Can you talk a little bit about, because I think terminology oftentimes paralyzes people. We know that we don't use the R word. We know that. We get that. We understand that. But there are other words that we're like, oh, I can't talk about disability because I'm going to say something wrong. Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Oh, absolutely. And so many people feel that way. They feel, oh, I really don't think I could talk about this subject because I don't really know exactly what to say, and I might hurt somebody's feelings or offend somebody, or somebody's mama's going to call me, and it's going to be a whole thing. So, and that you are not alone. That happens to a lot of people. As far as language and how we identify people, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act in 1990, when it was amended, added that we should refer to someone as a person first and then their disability. Because what was happening is we were getting a lot of, oh, those handicapped kids, you know, those disabled kids, wheelchair kids, things like that. And so just a simple thing, you know, switching and saying, oh, student with a disability, or a student who uses a wheelchair. You kind of switched that language so that we thought about the person before the disability. Now, plot thickens. Started in the deaf community. People who are deaf said, no, I'm deaf. I'm hearing impaired. I'm not a person with a hearing impairment. And that's awesome. So what I do then, if somebody says, no, I don't have autism, I'm autistic, I say, fantastic. Thank you so much for telling me. And just as when anyone else reveals to you how they identify, you, of course, will forever and ever use those pronouns refer to them in that way. It's the same way as someone with a disability. So I always begin with person first because that's what the law asks me to do. And then if somebody says, no, I want to be identified as this, I say, absolutely. And then I do it that way from then on.
So helpful, so helpful. Something as simple as knowing that that's your progression. And it all just sounded like we're treating them as humans. It's, well, what do you want to, yeah, it's you, of course.
Yes.
I'm so glad you brought up pronouns, because as you were talking, I was starting to see two trains running here, that whatever your identity is what we need to honor you with, and that the terminology shouldn't get in the way with that.
Right.
We're flirting with something here that I know that in my personal life that I've struggled with, because we're all on a journey to understand blind spots. We're to understand what we can't see. And I want to talk a little bit about ableism, to understand, especially in music education, how we can set our students up with deficit thinking as opposed to setting them up for success. So can you talk to us a little bit, one, about what is ableism from your perspective, and then how can we tackle this?
Okay. Ableism is when we make an assumption on a person based on how they look or on a disability that you can see or someone tells you about. I'll use my very, very latest example. I have a student in one of my classes who was answering a question, and the student wrote, for example, if I have a student and he only has one arm, I'm going to make sure that I get him on an instrument he can play. I'm not going to exclude him from band. Like, he could play the trombone with his feet. I was like, oh, sweetie, what if I don't want to play the trombone? That a person who has a disability should still have the option to play the instrument that suits them best, right? Well, side note, right? Research tells us if you choose your instrument based on timbre, you're going to stay with it longer. So, that was a little ableist of that student. He's wonderful, and he will definitely be learning. But a lot of people do that. They'll say, oh, okay, well, this student doesn't have this or can't do this, so he can play this. Well, no, we can make all kinds of adaptations to instruments. We can do all kinds of things to help kids have the instrument, have the timbre, the sound, the experience that they want. So I think, the very first choice is in an instrument, and making sure that that child gets the instrument they want. Another example that I see often in choral ensembles is the whole choir comes and they're on the risers and everything's going great. And then here comes a student who uses a wheelchair, who's always off to the side, spaced oddly from the other students. And I wonder, why can't that student be voice matched or paired right somewhere into that front row or someone with everyone else? So, just things like anything we might do or might say or make an assumption about someone, is ableist or a result of ableism. And I know as a country, we're looking at a lot of isms right now. And I just encourage people to think about ableism as part of it.
Absolutely. And as we start to talk about what some of these challenges are that we're facing as a country, racism being front and center, understanding that all of these isms require us to crawl inside of our own brain into uncomfortable places to see what our biases are, and to say, how self-aware am I? What am I bringing to the table? And then we can start to tackle these. So, the story that you just mentioned about your student, as you were telling that story, my mind, because we've had conversations, went to, oh, sweetie, right there with you. But in his heart, he was thinking with the right motivation. He was saying, how can we make this work? But it was when we got to assuming. We assumed that there was a limitation there that was holding that student back. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Along with this idea of ableism, I think that once we can broaden our minds and saying students can often do more than we think they can, and we are the ones who actually hold students back, we need to talk about adapting instruction. So when we have an instruction, whether it be a musical instruction piece or whether it be an SEL instruction piece, then we can start about how do we adapt. So can you talk a little bit about just the philosophy of, I know it's what we do as music teachers. We adapt on a daily basis, but how do we adapt with this in mind for SEL and music?
The way I adapt every lesson plan is at the bottom of every plan, I write the words size, color, pacing, and modality. And then under modality, I put visual, oral, kinesthetic. To be sure that everything I teach, everything I present, everything we do, I do in a visual, an oral, and a kinesthetic way before I expect the students to perform it, or especially before I assess them. And this gets difficult in performance-based classrooms like band, orchestra, choir. It's easier in elementary general music and in secondary general music. But, you know, when you get the chair and you get the stand and you get the horn, you know, it's hard to continue kinesthetics. So that's why I think it's important to always have that piece in there too. Some students with disabilities can only learn in one of those ways. They can learn visually or orally or kinesthetically, but not all three. So when some snooty college teachers and stuff go, oh, well, that's not true. Oh, yes, it is. So it is for people with disabilities. So that's why I make sure I'm doing everything visually, orally, and kinesthetically in every lesson. Because again, kids don't have Sharpie on their foreheads. What modality works for them? So plus it's just really fun for all kinds of kids. You know, even though kids have already got the information, just to practice it and think about it and transfer it in a different way helps everybody become more flexible in their thinking. Size. I make sure that if I'm introducing something, that I've got something that's larger for students who may need to see. Those 5 lines get really small by the time we get to grade 5 music, right? It was all fine and dandy in the very beginning method book, and then life happened. So I make it larger, and then some students need to have their own enlarged staff and music on their stand with them. And it can be because they have a diagnosed visual disability or not. So I often have several different sizes, and they can come get the size that works best for them. Color, I color code everything that I can. I really like using erasable highlighters, and I'm thrilled to find that there are still people who don't know what erasable highlighters are. So, I mean, because for me, it was that moment in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I was like, oh my God. So like one size you could, you write on your music, and then the other side, it'll erase it. So if you Google erasable highlighter, it'll show you. So yeah, right now. So erasable highlighters help in music because then you haven't ruined your copy or your octavo, right? You can just erase it. And so I color code things so that students, and let students choose their own colors for what it means to them. So, sharps, right? So sometimes writing the sharp in and the pencil isn't enough, especially for a kid with disabilities. But they could take a blue marker and go wham, every time that G sharp comes, it really helps them when they go to play it. Pacing is how much we expect a student to keep in their brain or be able to do at one time. So if we're asking our students to do like all other scales and arpeggios for a test, I might have a student who has disabilities do 3 every day for 4 days. They're still doing the same amount of work as the other students. We're just chunking it a little bit so they don't have to think through all 12, because for some students to keep their brain going at that intensity for the amount of time it takes them is not fair, because that's not the way their brain was hardwired. Did I size color? Yeah, I did it. Yes. So those are the 4.
It's funny that so much of what I'm hearing really comes down to giving students choice, to allowing them to choose. And as much as we in arts and music education say, oh, poo-poo standardized tests, we actually really like to standardize. We like to really kind of put people into nice, clean boxes. That's not a good thing, is it?
It's not. I mean, Scott, we survived it. But, I can think back to times when I felt that way. And I'm like, I don't think I want to make a kid feel that way. And when I started teaching, I certainly taught that way. Mm-hmm. 34 years ago, I was a very different teacher, and there were a lot of rules. So, but I've kind of learned, as you said, to give students choice, to think about how they feel and their perspective on things, and to develop a community rather than here I am, I'm on the podium.
And that every student doesn't need to choose the same thing.
No.
That that choice is going, we need to trust them. We need to trust our kiddos to choose what's best for them.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you give us some examples maybe of what this adaptation sequence would look like for teachers trying to do some SEL activities.
Okay, sure. Well, I picked one out of your book, which I always keep near me. Also, I got his autograph, so be jealous. Okay. So you have one on page 155 where you take America the Beautiful, and then it says anticipating potential errors. And it is a fantastic way to talk about how, we all make mistakes. Things are going to happen. Let's look at this and see what might happen or what some things you think you might do. That kind of help, especially kids who are perfectionists, or may have imposter syndrome, just to help them understand and know. So I was thinking about these errors, and you had errors that might happen in rhythm, things that might happen in tuning with the octave, to kind of remind yourself when there's going to be like a leap in between two notes. And I thought, okay, so let's think about that with size, color, pacing, and modality. So with size, I thought it would be cool to have in the front on a smartboard, right, have this all larger so that somebody could see it. Or even, again, have the enlarged paper and have a kid be able to have it there to write on it or to use it. Color, that kids could color code by type of error. So, okay, guys, what color should a rhythm mistake be? Blue. Okay, so when they get to the blue ones, they can color code that. Large leaps, let's make them red, and let them color code that way. Pacing, a student could maybe focus only on the things that might be a rhythm error. So that day, and then the next day, they can maybe focus on the large leaps. And then the next day, right? So that by the time you've gone through a whole cycle and done this a few times, every student has focused on one thing. Some kids focused on all of it all the time because they can, and it's fun for them. And then modality, right? So we had our visual, and then aural, playing, right? Or having them play it or sing it. And then kinesthetic, having them move. Okay, so let's move. Aha, oh, this is fun. Okay, so let's move every time we see that dotted quarter note, that tricky dotted quarter note. Bum, 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 bum. Oh, that's fun. Now stay. Bum, 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 bum. Right? To have them practice all the different things. So that's one way to do it. That's the fun thing about adapting this way, is there's really no right answers. Is that, your creativity, the creativity of your students, however many different ways you want to do it. The most important thing is that you do it and let kids learn in lots of different ways, and that with adaptations, you can do them for the whole class. So we don't just hand out the markers to one kid and say, okay, Ben, this is for you, because IEP. But anybody who wants to use the markers can use the markers. And what usually happens is in the beginning, every kid. And then really after a while, only the ones who really need it use it. And it's kind of fun to see which adaptations they choose to use for themselves on a regular basis.
It's a journey, and all the students are learning how to be a community around it. I absolutely love it. So you talked about those students who need to be able to do everything right off the bat. And we all know those students. And some of those students are the ones who you mentioned who might have anxiety, fear of failure, and the things of the like. But I've heard you talk about the bell curve, about how diversity is a bell curve, and we have the students with disability. But we also have this group of students on the other side that require just as much attention. Can you talk a little bit about that bell curve?
Yes. For every student who has an IQ of 80, there is an equal number of students who has an IQ of 120. And so as we go this way, we go this way. And in schools, we spend an awful lot of time learning and talking and writing and reading about the students who fall below average on the bell curve. Mainly, honestly, because we need to pull up their grades so they pass their standardized tests. So, fun fact. All right, so on the other side of the bell curve are the students who are going to pass the test. In fact, they may have been bused to your school to raise the standardized test scores of that school, right? Generally, people don't worry about them because they're going to pass the test. They're going to be fine. So nobody worries about students who are intellectually gifted except the students who are intellectually gifted, and they worry about it a lot. when they come home and their grown-up says, "What'd you learn in school today?" And they're like, "Nothing." And they mean it because they have already mastered your curricula for the year. So let's say you're in 4th grade general music and you're working on due to data, takadimi. I'm not religious about rhythm syllables. So whatever it is you're doing, right? Those 4 16th notes, one agenda. This kid's been doing, has composed with that, can improvise, can throw it into any one of 5 modes, and it's got to sit there and go. So the same thing happens in instrumental or choral music, right? Because let's say a student whose IQ is, let's say, 150. They could be 10 years old. Their mental age is 15. And it's very difficult for them to sit in rehearsals and learn the same things over and over again. My go-to generally for kids who are intellectually gifted is individual part work. Asking that kid to do more than one thing at a time. Because when we make a kid split their brain into several parts with different parts of their brain doing different things at the same time, they get really busy. So, and then the tendency to either drop out, do nothing, or be naughty is decreased. So if I'm going to play, let's say we're playing scales, right? So we're running through our scales. I may have some kids create an ostinato in their feet to play, and they can all be different while they're playing the scales. And then when they've got that and can do that with all the competing ostinati, I say, super. So we're in duple. I want you to put your ostinati in triple. Or, oh, can you put your ostinati in 5/4? And we're in 3/4? I know, right? Okay, so just like your eyes just went, Scott, when they do that, you know you've found the appropriate level for them. There's this look and you go, all right. then you know you found it. We have to have things for our kids to do. So if we're composing, right, and this kid's already done it, okay, super. I want you to create an obligato. Oh, and can you also then transpose it for the B-flat instruments for me? So just go ahead.
Hearing so much neuroplasticity, I mean, and this is why when we talk about kinesthetics, why it is so important to get the body moving. And some of the best, specifically, I've seen some really spectacular Kodai folks who do this expertly, to have one hand doing this, another hand doing this, your head doing this, your voice doing this. And the more you trisect the brain, it becomes fabulous. But all of this really hinges a little bit on the student being self-aware of saying, this is where my challenge bar is. This is the skill set I'm bringing. This is what I need to do to push me. And for when Dr. Hammel says, I'm going to do this and you can try to do this, well, am I going to throw myself into the deep end, or am I just going to start taking one step at a time? Right. And this is where I see some SEL intersections just becoming really powerful.
Absolutely. Yes. Choices and knowing your limits and knowing, right, what you can do. And when you get super frustrated, to be able to wind it back a little bit to be more something you feel you can do.
Absolutely. Thank you for those specific examples. That was powerful. Sure. I want to talk about the world we're living in right now. We're living in the world of a pandemic. We're living in a world of profound racism. And a lot of people are struggling. How do we address this in our classrooms? I would like to pick your brain just a little bit about how can we have these conversations and tackle some of these profound challenges where we know our students are bringing anxiety, these things are tearing our students apart. How can we address these in our classroom while being empathetic with students with disability?
Mm-hmm. I think what I've seen lately that's really amazing about music teachers around the country is the literature that they're choosing and the amount of band, orchestra, choral, folk song generated composed music about and starring people with differences. So, and all kinds of differences, which can reflect any of the isms that we're working on defeating right now. You almost feel like I'm in a Marvel comic, right? And I'm trying to defeat this ism, and this is my tool. And, so we're really trying to hit them all. I think in the literature, what we have to be really intentional about the music that we choose. And that has been a very emotional thing for some music teachers to tackle, especially teachers who've been teaching for a long, long time, to suddenly say, can't do this song anymore, can't do that song anymore, can't do that song anymore. To kind of, but then I think to realize there's so many stinking songs, we'll be okay. But it has been a curve to have teachers, a lot of teachers went through that fall 18, fall 19. And then here comes coronavirus. So, which upended our teaching and our practices and our materials all over again. But I think the material that you choose has to be really intentional, whether you are explicit about what you chose and why, or whether it's implicit. For example, I'm teaching a young flutist right now, and he is a 5th grade young man who was Black. And we got to my old Kentucky home in the flute book. And I said, Justin, we're not going to do this song. So I want you to just kind of put an X over it, and we're going to go to the next song because I don't like that song. And I wasn't explicit about it. And then he goes, why? And I said, well, because that song is racist. And I don't do racist music with my students. And then being Justin, he goes, but why? So I think letting the students kind of lead those situations, so I ended up going into the whole minstrelsy thing and talking about it with him. But some students aren't ready for that. And I think as teachers, we have to be aware of when we've gone far enough for a day or for a lesson. So I think in our materials, in both explicit and implicit ways, sometimes I will choose materials that show diverse groups of children, and I will just do the book or do the song and won't say anything about it. It's just that's who's present in my material so that students get an idea of in music, there is this diversity, there is, all this divergent thought and people and everybody's there learning together. And another day I might say, here's a song that's a spiritual that was, and then talk about it. But I think when we really spell it out for kids, and then other days when we just kind of lay out, this is who I am, and this is what I choose to present to you in music, also lets them know who you are as a person without giving a whole lecture about it.
And that vulnerability is okay. That vulnerability is central to what we are as musicians and as humans. You know that you and I both have an affinity for a certain narwhal named Wendell. Could you talk a little bit about some of your favorite books or some of your favorite tunes, some specific materials that you're using right now that you're really excited about? And maybe if there was an SEL tie-in.
Okay. Well, first tell me how you use Wendell. How do you do Wendell and its SEL?
Oh, he just came in the mail, so I haven't played with him yet. All I know is that our little 4-year-old Nathan loves Wendell. So I haven't explored it yet, but okay. I know that it's on my to-do list. Okay. For example, my favorite book right now that I'm using a lot is Giraffes Can't Dance. That is one of my favorite books to talk about empathy, to talk about how we can all bring different skills to the table and not have preconceived notions. And yes, does that have ableist tie-ins? Yes. Does that have racial tie-ins? Yes, we can broaden that. But the giraffe is still central, and it's an appropriate and approachable portal for even our youngest students. Mr. Rogers, all of this. So that's Giraffes Can't Dance for me.
Well, to ruin Wendell for you, he has wonderful friends who are very creative and very understanding of who he is. When I use Wendell, and I'm being specific and thinking more disability, Wendell struggles with the sensory domain. His tusk is too loud. Things get too loud for him. So he needs for his friends to bring things down and make him a part of things in his own way. So I talk about sensory domain with Wendell. Books, yes, I've got a couple right here. One that I love is this called I Want to Be. And this book stars a little girl whose family asked her what she wanted to be. And she said, I don't know, I'll let you know tomorrow. So she goes through her whole day talking about the things that she wants in her life. And it's just wonderful things. She looks about 9 or 10 to me. So wonderful things like, I want to be green, but not so green that I can't also be purple. Just really kind of neat statements. I want to be still, but not so still that I turn into a mannequin or get mistaken for a tree. So all these things that she decides she wants to be, which are all things any girl would want to be, right? It just so happens that the girl starring in the story is Black. And at the end, she says, I want to be life, doing everything. That's all. So when I do this with students, we compose with found sounds. So I will put things around the classroom, like a 2-liter bottle of Coke or some spoons, an empty bottle, by the way. So spoons, empty can of Coke. There's a theme here. Wrapper for Doritos, right? All these things that are just around the room, the kids go find them and then they make their own composition to go with it. So that is one. Another one I love that you need to get for the child in your house. It's called
Nathan. Yep.
She Persisted.
Ooh, love it.
Yes, it was written by Chelsea Clinton, and it stars 13 American women. Each one is only just a page long. Just 13 American women who changed the world. Which, if I still had a little one in my house, and if you're anybody who's tired of theirs, just send them to me. I'm here. I know, coronavirus. So it's something like you might want to read at bedtime. Just one story every night, and it's all women, women of all races and in lots of different time periods, and what they did, the adversity they went through, and how they succeeded in life. So don't have a music-y way to do that, but I really love it.
But I bet people could, as we start to think about what those people were accomplishing, what those women were accomplishing. Mm-hmm. Every single person, every single time period has a soundtrack, and we don't have to dictate what that soundtrack is. We can put our students on those scavenger hunts to figure that out on their own.
Ooh, you just middle school general music the heck out of that, Scott. The last one that I brought is Blown in the Wind. Beautiful illustrations, right? I have Bob Dylan singing it. And it's got all kinds of kids, just lots of kids who can be from anywhere in the world, beautiful illustrations. And what I have used this, I actually used this in high school one time with some high school students, and we talked about questions and answers in music, and then questions and answers in poetry and in books and how it all goes together. So I did Blown in the Wind, showed them the picture book, like they were 5 years old. They loved it. And then a lot of them had never heard the song Blown in the Wind. And then I had them write in partners some question and answer phrases to music. So how do you write questions and answers?
I love that. And how we answer and how we respond, that's social awareness into decision making. Yes. It all comes together so beautifully. And you said something that the high schoolers loved it. I read children's books to my college kids and they love it. There is no age that these books are limited to, and the simple messages that they hit home, we all need to hear them. And when I do PD, professional development for teachers, I read children's books, and sometimes we just need to be kids again. So I'm all about it. I would like to close our time together with a fairly personal question, if you don't mind. Sure. That you have 2 fabulous daughters, and you have 2 who have been highly successful in the music industry, but very, very differently so. But I see that each of them engage in what I would call social and emotional learning or social and emotional competencies in very different ways through different definitions of music, different modalities of music. So could you just spend a few minutes talking us through your daughters and how you see SEL manifesting in their lives? And brag away.
My daughters, they really are the best. And they're real. And I think one of the things that we did with them when they were little is we let them be real. We let their feelings be big when they needed to be big. We didn't ever tell them how to feel or how to be or tell them how they were feeling. We let them feel and big, and it was an artistic house in all ways. It was just art and music and dance and everything. My older daughter, Hannah, is the principal flutist for the Detroit Symphony now. And one thing that makes me so proud of Hannah is all of the community engagement work she does with the Detroit Symphony. This summer, she and the horn player organized a summer intensive program for pre-professional players. It was free, a whole week that was free. They created 154 Zoom accounts, scheduled 78 students with faculty for master classes and seminars and lessons and everything, just because they knew that all of those people who were there where they were 5 years ago were sitting here this summer with no summer festivals, nothing to do. Hannah spends her time doing that. Hannah goes and plays in homeless shelters. Hannah goes and does things for other people. And I just adore her for that. Holly is a singer and a songwriter in Nashville, Tennessee. And she does a lot of writing about social emotional issues and social justice issues. And she's a super fan of Scott. They worked together some when Holly was teaching. And when you listen to Holly's songs, you cannot help but feel, and she'll put you in a place, in a mindset. And I don't ever finish a song of hers without really feeling changed myself and feeling better and different. And kind of that's been her goal. Currently on our latest project, she had artists create prints that we're going to hang up here soon, but we don't have them framed yet. And funds that one goes to suicide prevention, another goes to Black Lives Matter. So she has these prints, and so people that reflect her music. So people, I guess the artists listened to her song and then drew art that went with it. And so they're going to donate that money to charitable organizations. So yes, I love them, and they're wonderful. And yes, those are my daughters.
Oh, and those are the success stories. I wanted to kind of crawl inside your head on that as a way of wrapping this up, because when we have the opportunity for our students to go out there and our children to go out there, mm-hmm. Those are examples of when we see self-awareness and social awareness and responsible decision-making. They're not silos. The examples that you just gave are what this looks like when we get into the real world. And those are the life skills that we're trying to teach our students. So I think 2 thumbs way up to you and Bruce. I mean, really, really phenomenal. So Alice, we're wrapping up today, but any last minute thoughts on what social and emotional learning means to you and how it can manifest in working with students with disability?
Oh my goodness. I don't have any pizzazz to end with, but I do know that social emotional learning is the construct of it is what we've been looking for. What's that? What we've been waiting for. It's kind of like what in music education we've really needed to have something to kind of codify what many of us have been doing anyway. I think it is the way in which we are going to create a more stable, more loving, more caring society. And it seems too simple, but oh my gosh, just giraffes can't dance, just blowing in the wind. I mean, it really makes a big difference in the lives of our students and in their communities.
Alice, you say you don't have pizzazz, but everything that comes out of your mouth is pizzazz. So thank you so much for joining us today. We've learned so much about you, about what social and emotional learning can mean for diverse populations, and just broadly how we need to assume that every student can. And really, really appreciate your time today. Dr. Hammel, thank you so much, and be well.
Thank you, Dr. Edgar, and thank you, Music for All, for inviting me. Thank you.
Music for All's mission is to create, provide, and expand positively life-changing experiences through Music for All. Our vision is to be a catalyst to ensure that every child across America has access. Alice talked about this so profoundly, access and opportunity to participate in active music making in their scholastic environment. I deeply want to thank Alice Hammel for showing us the connections between teaching students with disability, music education, and social and emotional learning so we truly can reach Music for All. I'd like to thank our national presenting sponsor, the Yamaha Corporation of America. Be sure to check out the Yamaha Educator Suite at yamahaeducatorsuite.com. And I would also like to thank GIA Publications for their support. For Music for All, I'm Scott Edgar. Thank you.